Welcome to Dodgers Dogs. As part of the Dodgers Daily Network, Casey Porter here. There he is, joined by Austin Brubaker. There's that pretty mug right there. Austin, how are you tonight, man? Excited to welcome to Dodgers Dogs. As part of the Dodgers Daily Network, Casey Porter here. There he is, joined by Austin Brubaker.
Casey, should be a fun show that we get to have, going some back and forth and talking about because we've learned a little bit about this roster. The team is flying over to Japan right now. There is a lot to discuss since the last time that we talked.
Yeah. No doubt, so dive into it, the roster and all of it. I think maybe the most surprising part of it is Hae-Sung Kim left home, is going to start in AAA. I thought that was a pretty big-time announcement.
Yeah, so let's talk about that first, because there still currently is a battle going on, and this is a battle that we've foreseen for a little bit since the start of spring training. It is for that last position player spot, that those 5 different players that we had identified that were kind of fighting for a spot. Really, it was 3 main guys that were fighting for a spot, but with the emergence of some spring training performances, we saw a couple of guys rise up into some of the mix. It was a battle between Andy Pages, James Outman, Hae-Sung Kim, David Bodie, Eddie Rosario. Eddie Rosario, David Bodie being the non-roster invites, the guys that had much harder odds because they're not on the 40-man roster towards getting into that spot. And despite the great spring from a guy like a David Bodie, who was phenomenal during this spring, he did not make the roster, in part because I think some of the positions that the Dodgers are looking to cover or provide additional coverage for happen to be either the center field or second base position, which, yes, David Bodie does play a little bit of the second base position, but there was not quite as much coverage for the center field position as what they were looking for. And so they decided not to add, at least right now, David Bodie onto this roster, or Eddie Rosario can only really play the corner outfields. So then they left the surprising choice to leave off Hae-Sung Kim. Hae-Sung Kim is going to be starting the season in Oklahoma City. He is not flying over with the team right now to Japan, which we'll talk a little bit about that because the Dodgers did release a video about an hour ago. They haven't announced the roster, but they showed a good majority of the people that are going to be on that roster. We'll go through the list of the players that they showed and some of the other expectations of who could be on that roster as well. Hae-Sung Kim is not part of that. He's staying back in Arizona right now. The expectation is that he's going to start off in Oklahoma City. And I think from the outset, let's just think of this before we get to spring training with him. It was always going to be something that likely was going to be at least some sort of transition period coming over from the KBO. And that has nothing against Hae-Sung Kim. That is just looking at the history of recent performances from players, from highly touted players that have come over from the KBO. Looking at Ha-Sung Kim when he came over and played for the Padres. I believe he had a 70-something WRC plus in his first full season. And you look at his numbers in the KBO, they were better than Hae-Sung Kim's were. You look at Jung-Hoo Lee, who I believe had an 83 during his limited time in San Francisco last year. A little bit of a transition period for him when he had better numbers than Hae-Sung Kim did coming over from Korea. So it was always going to be at least a little bit of a transition. The question was he going to be able to make consistent enough contact and utilize the great speed, which we have seen through the course of spring training through a couple of infield hits, that he would be able to utilize his contact ability to be able to make consistent enough contact against high enough velo to make it stick at the big league level. I think ultimately the Dodgers decided that it's best for him and his development to get every single day reps, because what you don't want to do is you don't want to give him limited reps at the big league level, not facing a whole lot of pitching, so then his bat only has a limited time to be able to adjust to the big league pitching, and then shoehorn kind of what his development is. I think allowing him to be able to continue to get more reps at the minor league level, a level that of which he has not seen before, I think is going to be beneficial for him. And it's also going to allow him to be able to explore a bunch of different positions. We saw him play a lot of second base, which I have no hesitation whatsoever playing second base. I think he's going to be really solid at that. Shortstop's a little bit more of a question mark just because in the KBO, he did not spend a lot of time at the shortstop position since 2021. And then you saw at the end of spring training, I think this is something that's a little bit key. He started to play a little bit of center field as well, taking the mantle of Tommy Edman-ish a little bit of that up the middle type defense. If he can become rock solid of that, and he can hit a little bit more for consistent contact, which we did not see quite as much during spring training, I have no doubt that Ha-Seong Kim is going to be a player that the Dodgers signed him to be. Maybe not the best player to come over from the KBO or the best player to ever play in a Dodgers uniform, but a really solid contributor that has a ton of tools. It's about finding that consistency, and how you're able to find that consistency, I think, is with consistent playing time, and I don't think they were comfortable giving him that quite yet.
Yep. So what surprises you about all the guys are taking to Japan? The Ha-Seong Kim thing, Coach Holt and I addressed that Sunday night. It was a tough conversation, and I kind of set the precursor there that, hey, this is something that's in consideration here. And I said even then I was not in favor of Ha-Seong Kim making the roster for a couple of reasons. I didn't think it had been earned. He did not win the spot in spring, period. End of discussion. I am all about the meritocracy of things. How many times have I talked about the merit system, not the country club system? So to be consistent, I've also said I don't think James Outman or Andy Pages has earned it. And so I've said it's David Bodie. I understand the positional versatility piece to this, but really it's more so it's just, do you really want to do all that to DFA somebody to get them on the 40-man roster, right? That kind of thing. It's more so that type of decision. Just, is David Bodie that big of a deal to DFA Hunter Fiducia? Something like that. It's something that it's more so that to me.
Yeah, it's a little bit of that. And then I was actually doing this quite a bit because I'm sure we'll get into this conversation after this, the whole James Outman versus Andy Pages, because I think that's a worthwhile discussion to be able to have off of that. What I wanted to do a little bit, though, is just look at the depth that the Dodgers have at each one of these positions. If you look at David Bodie, the three positions that I think that the Dodgers would probably feel comfortable with him playing would be the first base, second base, and third base. Those would be the positional versatility that I think that David Bodie would have. And you just look at some of those positions and some of the depth. There's not quite as much depth at first base and third base, but they are filled in by players that you expect to play every single day in Freddie Freeman and Max Muncy, respectively. And then you look at the second base position. That position actually has a pretty insane amount of depth. You have Tommy Edman, who I think is expected to get majority reps of second base, but you have Miguel Rojas who can play second base. You have Kike Hernandez and Chris Taylor who have the ability to play second base. If you needed to, you could call up Ha-Seong Kim. Mookie Betts can play second base. If you even want to talk about Max Muncy or Austin Barnes, both of them have played second base in the past, although I wouldn't expect them to play a lot of second base. So if you're talking about just pure positions of need, I think there's probably a little bit more of a need for a little bit of additional depth in the outfield as opposed to some of the infield, which you add on top of that the lack of him not being on the 40-man roster right now. And I just didn't see the Dodgers finding a way for him to be able to fit on the roster. That being said, at least right now, I think he plays a pretty good role as being depth in case there's something that happens to a Freddie Freeman or a Max Muncy, who have, if you're talking about Freddie Freeman, obviously dealing with the injuries that he sustained towards the end of the 2024 season. And Max Muncy, who has dealt with some injuries in the past, he's one of those guys where if they're out for an extended period of time, especially if it's a third base, if it's Max Muncy, he's one of the first guys that's going to jump up and probably going to be the guy that they call on and rely upon to at least play some sort of role off of the bench. So if he still has that, if the Dodgers wrote that clause to where he's allowed to be on Oklahoma City for a month or two and have a little bit of that depth, I think he's an important depth piece to be able to have. And then we'll see where the health of this position player staff is. great spring training. He did absolutely nothing wrong. I think just the structures of the way this roster is constructed, and you throw into the fact that I wouldn't count David Bote as an everyday type player, and all of the bats on the bench are right-handed, makes it a little bit complicated, and there's a lot of things stacking up against David Bote to where it seemed like he needed to hit every single time in order to even try to convince the Dodgers to make that decision, which is frustrating because that's not really meritocracy type of format, but that's just the way the Dodgers have constructed this roster.
It is, and I'll say it is in this way. So why do you have a David Bote type player? You don't have a David Bote type player to like be your everyday second baseman for like 6 months. So you have David Bote to do what Austin Wynns did. So if you need 8 games out of somebody, you have him. He's called a quad A guy. So he's not a guy necessarily you get to keep in Oklahoma City, right? Although Andre Lipsius did, and they've had some other guys that did stick the entire year at Oklahoma City that did have major league experience. But the Dodgers typically don't go get a Luke Williams or a David Bote or somebody like that has major league experience just to keep them in AAA all year. So why they get these guys, they don't get them to be AAA guys, and they don't get them to be everyday major leaguers. So they're not major leaguers and they're not AAA guys. So that's why we call them quad A guys. They're 4A guys. And so what the 4A guys are there for, the Nabil Crismats, the Dinelson Lamets, is if you have an injury that's 8 days. You need an 8-day spell to spell somebody. David Bote goes up to the Major League Club. He gives you Major League at-bats for 8 days, long enough to get your starter back, and then you DFA him. So the Dodgers were never going to do that after the first 2 games of the year, right? I mean, I talk about meritocracy, and I mean it, but the reason why this was never going to happen for David Bote right out of the chute is because he was never going to be on this 26-man roster for all 162 games, and the Dodgers are going to wait until there's a period of the season where they actually need him, as you were talking about, due to health, and then they'll DFA him, and then they'll either get him back like they did Nabil Crismat, or he'll go on and get picked up like Luke Williams did. But the first part of the season, the first 4 or 5 games, especially 2 games in Tokyo, that's not the timing to use your quad A depth.
Yeah, I don't think that's the timing right there. And there could be a conversation, and I'm sure that a lot of people have made this point, especially people online. Well, why didn't we have David Bote and we still have Chris Taylor, who struggled, especially during that last game of spring training, still dealing with a lot of swings and miss issues during spring training. Part of that has to do with the contract that Chris Taylor is getting. He's being paid $13 million, and that has some value. His history with being a part of the team matters. The year in which he's going into this upcoming year matters, but also Chris Taylor does something that I think they feel a lot more comfortable with him doing than they would with a David Bote, and I think they feel comfortable with Chris Taylor playing some in the outfield. And you look at some of the guys that they have in the outfield, especially if Tommy Edman is going to take a little bit more of a primary role at the second base position. You do have Michael Conforto, you do have Teoscar Hernandez, you do have Andy Pages or a James Outman, and we'll get to that discussion in just a minute, I'm sure. And then you have Kike Hernandez being able to back up, and Chris Taylor also being your backup guys for the outfield. So there's just not as much depth for the outfield as there is for the infield. You combine that with some of the roster structures that are going against David Bote, and nothing against him. There could be a time, and very well could be a time for him to be able to step up and the Dodgers to call upon him on this roster for this year. But at least to start the season, they want to keep as many options open as they possibly can be for the season, especially because we're seeing injuries, at least on the pitching side, start to pile up before we even get to Japan right now. You want to keep as many guys available as you can in your organization, and you don't want to pull the trigger immediately right now. And if they pull the trigger immediately on him, they would either sacrifice some of their outfield depth or remove one of the guys that they might have been relying upon in this season before they need to get rid of somebody.
Okay, so we have a question from our crowd, the Natron, on Instagram. Austin, let me go ahead and click this over right here. And this is Alex Freeland. We have a question about how's Alex Freeland doing in spring training. Want to go over some numbers from Alex Freeland? He has not gotten the run that I think a lot of people thought that he was going to get, being the type of prospect that he is. So I think that part of it, as far as just the lack of playing time, has been a little bit disappointing. But go over Alex Freeland's numbers for spring training.
Yeah, it hasn't been a ton. I remember at the beginning of the spring training, it was a ton of Sean McClain coming in late at shortstop, which
even
still
yesterday
was a lot. Even late was a lot of Sean McClain at shortstop. Alex Freeland a little bit slow, although I think we did get to see him a little bit of time at the shortstop position, which was encouraging to be able to see him there out on the field. When he was out there, he was able to perform a little bit. There was still a lot of concern as far as swing and miss. Only had 12 different plate appearances during spring training, 6 of which ended in a strikeout, but add a 300 batting average, 417 on base percentage, 600 slugging percentage, which equated to a 162 WRC plus. So that's going to be the thing to keep in mind for him.
Say that WRC plus again.
162 in spring training, which is just in 12 plate appearances. Extremely. That's like 3 different games that you're talking about at plate appearances for Alex Freeland. So I don't take that into account too much. But the biggest thing for him going forward to watch in Oklahoma City has to be with that swing and miss ability. Part of the reason why he has the prospect 100%. Pedigree that he does is because of what he showed early in the 2024 season, which was he is a reliable up-the-middle shortstop. I would feel very comfortable with him at the shortstop position. But when he made consistent contact, he had a really good eye at the plate, which means that he was drawing a lot of walks, and he was putting the ball in play pretty consistently, with which his swing, he's able to get a lot of gap-to-gap power, and he's really able to get a lot of different base hits. If there's too much swing and miss, that can take away from a lot of those different aspects. So that's going to be the thing that I'm going to be looking for Alex Freeland is how is his consistency at the plate with the swing and miss in particular. If it's even close to what it was at the beginning of 2024, the Dodgers are going to have to make some sort of decision as far as, okay, when is going to be the best time to be able to call him up, because they have somebody that's extremely talented coming up in the wings. So it's going to be a good problem to have if he's able to make that consistency at the plate. That's the thing to watch out for with him.
So he had a 50% strikeout rate and still had a WRC plus of 167, you said, right?
162.
Well, okay, so how many games? 3 games, you said?
Well, that I don't know how many that's probably 6 or 7 spring training games. But if you're talking like regular season game, 4 plate appearances, a game, that's 3 different games that you're so basically.
No big sample size, but what it does show you is how he can impact any one given game. I mean, you're talking about almost 70% above league average. So yes, it's not a big sample size. You can't make any kind of scouting evaluation off that, but you can determine just how dynamic and how much impact he can make on just 3 games. I mean, that shows you that he can pretty much carry an offense with that. Now, if let's say that strikeout rate goes down to 25%, it cuts in half. That WRC plus might do what it did at AA and go up to 200, right? And I mean, and he'd be one of the best players in minor leagues. But you hit it on the head. And I don't mean this to sound negative, and if Alex is watching or if any of his folks are watching, I certainly don't mean this to be negative at all. Very, very talented young man, and I think you hit it right on the head. It's kind of like a pitcher, like Edgardo Henriquez. What's going to be the key to Edgardo Henriquez? Can he consistently command the strike zone, right? The key to Alex Freeland's going to be, can he consistently put the ball on the bat? So he impacts the baseball better than most people do. Okay. I mean, he hits the ball very, very hard. Question is, can he put the bat on the ball enough to make that impact matter? It's going to come down to that for Alex Freeland to me.
Yep, and it's one of those things where it can be a very patient hitter, which might not reflect with a lot of the numbers, for example, with swing and strike percentage, in part because that statistic doesn't look at the numbers, the swings that he has, as opposed to in comparison to what some of the swings and misses. So that's going to be the biggest thing to watch for him. I think he does a decent job with that, but I think he can get even better. And if he gets even better, that takes him to that next level where he can be a major league caliber player and potentially potentially a big league regular type player, which would be game changer to add a little bit of youth onto this infield going forward for the Dodgers.
Yeah, totally agree with that. So that was our question from, I believe it was Nitron. Let me get back. Natron from our Instagram crowd. So thank you so much for that question, Natron. Hope you enjoyed our talk of Alex Freeland. So let's get into our conversation about, of course, you've got Yoshinobu Yamamoto. Let's talk about him first. I mean, let's talk about just how unbelievable this guy is. So when Yamamoto goes to the mound, it reminds me of watching like a magic trick. It's like watching a magician just do magic tricks. So the other day, here, let me give you an example. I'm not going to play video because I'll get tagged for it. We won't get kicked off, but
we already got kicked off on one of these shows before.
But it will be copyrighted, and then at that point, there's nothing. It doesn't get viewed as much. So, okay, so fastball the other day, 97, awesome. Sat 95, 95.6. That's very good for this time of year. But the spin was almost 2,500. So that backspin, anything over 2,300 is very good. Anything approaching 2,500 is elite, and anything 2,600 and above is like Hall of Fame elite, like Tyler Glass now is. So incredible spin on a 97 to 97 mile an hour fastball, and he threw it for a strike exactly 56% of the time, which 60% is that magic number for me. That 56, 58, 60 to 64% range for Yamamoto typically is where he is successful. So the end zone, as far as throwing strikes with his fastball, is very good. The spin on it was good. The velo was good. Also threw a sinker that was 95, and his sinker had almost 30 inches of combined movement. I mean, you're talking about 95 miles an hour. 30 inches is almost 3 feet. You're talking about a pitch that's 95 with almost 3 feet of movement, and then the splitter. So whenever he's able to throw his fastballs in the zone like that, and then what that allows him to do is just kind of let the splitter eat, just kind of throw the splitter, let it just drop in there and let hitters try to Bugs Bunny at it and see if they can hit it. And then whenever he's also landing the splitter, which he got a 59% whiff rate he got 100. So for every time he threw his splitter, every strike that he threw for his splitter got a swing. And on those swings, 59% of them ended up in swing and miss. And for the ones that were hit, average exit velo was 84.6. So he's able to throw his fastball and his splitter in the strike zone and get hitters out. So when he's able to do that, so what the big part of this, hang with me here. I know I'm like I like to do. I'm telling a short story and making it long. When he's able to land both his four seam and his two seam and his splitter in the zone and get outs with it, at that point he does not have to throw his curveball for a strike. Why is that a big deal? Because his curveball for a strike is the one that gets hit for a home run. That's the one he hangs. So what he was able to do with his curveball the other day, because he was in the zone with his fastball enough, and because his splitter had a 59% whiff rate, and he was getting swings in the zone that weren't hurting him, instead of having to throw his curveball to steal strikes with, he was able to bury his curveball in the dirt, which forced the hitters to chase that curveball. And then at that point, his one pitch that, in my opinion, is the most vulnerable to be hung and hit for a home run, his curveball is not in the zone. And so now you're taking that home run element away from Yamamoto. And then he had the cutter going, which the cutter's just that slight left turn. That's the pitch that he was able to steal strikes with as far as his breaking ball. And so to me, the way Yamamoto threw the other day, from a sequencing perspective and execution perspective, is literally the blueprint of what makes Yoshinobu Yamamoto an absolute magician.
Yeah, he is an absolute magician. There's a reason why they gave him $325 million without throwing a single major league pitch, is because he's able to execute his command when he is on. And I think, as you had stated, he was on during the other day. I think it was, Monday when he was pitching?
Yeah, he was unbelievable.
I fully expect that version of Yoshi Yamamoto coming up for a vast majority of this upcoming season with his pitch mix that he has, with the things that he learned during his first season of professional baseball. And now we turn the page, and now he's going to be starting the season in Japan, opening day for the Dodgers and opening day for Major League Baseball during his home country. I think it's going to be an exciting game for him. One of the biggest games that he's pitched upon, at least in his mind, pitching in his home country. I think it's going to be a big experience for him. And I think especially with this most recent outing, getting him up to speed, having him go in spring training, get him some length, which I think he pitched 13 some innings during the course of spring training this time. You're starting to see him get ramped up really early, and he's going to be called upon for the Dodgers opening day coming up, I believe a week from today, even though it's going to be weird because it's different time, like 3:00 in the morning, against the Chicago Cubs in Japan. It's going to be really fun.
Yeah, I agree. And to me, the length is great with Yamamoto. Fantastic. Dodgers are going to have plenty of bullpen arms just for a 2-game series, then come back for spring training.
Yeah.
So that's here nor there. If he throws 2-3 innings, fine. If he goes 5 because he's efficient, even better. But it's the complexity of which he sequenced and executed the complexity of his sequences. That's what got me fired up, because that's what Yamamoto is. I mean, it's a complexity in sequencing that hitters can't get a beat on. And then within that sequencing, every pitch type that he throws to home plate is an elite type of pitch. The fastball, the 4-seam, the 2-seam, the splitter, the curveball when it's buried in the dirt. I mean, they're just within just the incredible complexity of the sequencing, this stuff being thrown is elite too. So that's, to me, that's the essence of Yoshinobu Yamamoto. And if you're not as a baseball fan, beyond just being a Dodgers fan, just watching a guy pitch and have that type of skill level at that type of professional execution, it's just an absolute joy to watch. I hope Dodgers fans, beyond just winning and losing, just watch Yoshinobu Yamamoto and enjoy watching him perform his craft, because it is unbelievable.
Yeah, it is absolutely unbelievable. It's going to be exciting to see him pitch in Japan, being able to execute. And then we get to see what's going to be the Major League debut of Roki Sasaki the very next day. It's going to be Yoshinobu Yamamoto starting game 1 for the Los Angeles Dodgers. And then it's going to be Roki Sasaki, who we saw close out Cactus League play for the Dodgers yesterday. I believe it was yesterday, against the Cleveland Guardians. That's going to be fun to be able to see both of those guys go out there and pitch and see how they do. Remember, Yoshi Yamamoto got beat up a little bit during the Korea series against the Padres last year. So it would be interesting to see how Roki Sasaki is going to be able to respond, and just how much length the Dodgers are going to allow him to have going into that game, going into his Major League debut, especially because I don't know how many innings they want to put on him during the course of this season. I don't know if it's going to be something where they're going to limit him to 3 or 4 innings or something like that for the upcoming series. It's going to be interesting to watch.
Yeah. Okay, so let's get into it. James Outman and Andy Pages, neither one of them have done anything to separate themselves. Neither one of them have been great in spring training. I don't mean that to be negative. I'm trying to be fair. I hope you understand that. So they're both going to Tokyo. I'll say this. I think so. Let me ask you this: what type of defender is Teo?
He's not a great defender. He's better in right field, but a below average defender is what I would say.
What type of defender is Conforto?
I would say he's probably slightly below average to below average.
So the better fit on this team, the defender or the offender? The offender, if that's a word.
That is the question. Okay, so this is incredibly fascinating. So I think this is kind of what I expected it to come down to after all things were said. Once Ki-Sung Kim wasn't able to establish enough,
winning's better than losing,
to send him down to the minor league levels. Ultimately, it's James Outman or Andy Pages. And if you're just talking about a defensive fit and a left-handed bat, which this bench does not have a left-handed bat, James Outman profile-wise fits this team a lot better. So there is a lot of argument to say James Outman. Also, just looking at the numbers right now, James Outman had the better spring training. There were some very concerning numbers, nothing more concerning for James Outman than the numbers of strikeouts. His strikeout percentage through the course of spring training was just under 42%. Which is way too high. That means it's with a 36 different plate appearances. So it's one of the most amount of plate appearances. In fact, I think it's the most amount of plate appearances the Dodgers gave anybody, or tied for the most throughout the entire spring training. The 42% strikeout percentage is concerning. He did have some extra base power, which did boost up some of his numbers, which if he is going to establish himself more at the big league level, he has to hit for a little bit more of that power if the strikeouts are going to persist. Because what he was able to do, despite the 42% strikeout percentage, he had 207, 333, 483 slugging percentage, which equated to a 104 WRC plus for James Outman through the course of spring training, which at times did not look like a league average type of spring training hitter because
Say
of
that
the
again on the
miss.
WRC plus.
104.
So he was 4% above league average offensively in spring training.
That is correct. And that is mostly due to the power that he was able to produce when he was able to make contact. He had the home run, he had triple, a couple doubles, or it seemed like a lot of his hits that he had were going for extra bases, which went to his benefit quite a bit. And so there is a good argument. And let's remember with James Outman, this is something we talk about quite a bit and talked about through the entire offseason. 2023, he was a 4-WAR player. Because of how good he was defensively and because of some of the upside that there is offensively. If James Outman is a league average hitter at the big league level, you're talking about a 2.5 to 3 WAR player, and you're talking about somebody that has incredible value for any type of club. If he's able to be about a league average type hitter.
Okay, so let me stop you there. You there. He had a 104 WRC plus, correct?
Yeah, in spring training, yes.
So if he posted if he just did exactly in the regular season what he did in spring training, which to Dodgers fans are going to be like, he's 207 with a 42%. What the hell are you talking about? But if he just did that right there, what would his WAR be at the end of the year?
It depends on how much playing time that he gets, but assuming, let's say that
if he was the everyday center fielder, what would his WAR be?
If he gets everyday center field, because 118, I think it was WRC plus in 23, and that was 4 WAR, you're talking about 2.5 to 3 WAR type of player.
He had a 2.5, 3 WAR spring training.
If you equate that to a full season sample size, which is going to come with a lot of frustration, and it's going to come with a lot of question about the boom or bust mentality of this team. But I think with James Outman, I think there's enough players on this offense to be able to sustain that, to where if you decided to go with a James Outman, specifically because of his defensive upside and because of a lot of concern that comes with Andy Page's defense in center field, there is an incredibly good argument to say, hey, we're going to go with James Outman at this point because we believe that right now that he is the best fit for this club. And if there is because there's a lot of peripheries to say, hey, at least he's able to do this. That's going to be really solid. Right. At least he can be solid defender in center field. At least we know that he can be reliable with his. At least he's reliable running the bases and being able to steal a couple of extra bases, which there might not be as much of with Shohei Ohtani, perhaps not doing that as much this upcoming season. There is a lot, especially for the fit to start the 2025 season, a lot of arguments to be able to be made for James Outman, despite a lot of struggles that he had offensively at the plate with the swing and miss for him this upcoming spring training. So there's a lot of really good reasons to be able to point to James Outman and say, for the start of the 2025 season, you're the guy, and you're the guy that we want to be able to help carry the mantle, at least to start this season.
Yeah. And so Craig's saying put Edman in center and Rojas at second. I have no problem with that. I just don't think Miguel Rojas can be an everyday player. I think we've had that conversation. We had it about shortstop last year, and my comment on that was, I'm not saying he won't produce. I'm just saying he won't last. And so, I mean, Miguel Rojas is a utility player. He is depth. and he needs to remain that because I don't think he stays healthy if he doesn't. So I don't think that is although I have, if you want to take that lineup and play it the 2 games in Tokyo and throw the 2 games out there that way, I have zero. I think that's a good move.
Yeah.
But if you want to tell me that Rojas is your everyday second baseman, I would probably have a conversation about that.
Yeah, I don't think Miguel Rojas is going to be able to play every single day. I think he can probably play 80 games during this upcoming season, every other game maybe. Yeah, but here's what you can do. So right now the Dodgers currently have 8 different players that I think are going to be starting just about every single day. And when I say every single day, I'm talking about 500 different plate appearances. Shohei, Mookie, Freddie, Muncy, Smith, Teoscar, Conforto, and Edman. Then you just have one spot that you need to fill out in your lineup. And if you have a James Outman, it's not one of those things where it has to necessarily be every single day he's out there starting. You could have a good mix of James Outman going out there and playing some during righties. You can throw in Kike Hernandez. You can throw in Miguel Rojas. You can throw in Chris Taylor as a little bit of a rotation right there.
Yeah,
and with the James Outman, I think he would be comfortable enough in that type of role to be able to go out there and be able to.
If he's on the major league team, he'll be fine with it.
I think he's going to be. I think he's going to be totally fine with it if he's on the major league roster. So in that aspect, if you want to say, hey, we want Miguel Rojas to play a little bit more second base and Tommy Edman plays center field, I think James Outman could be one of those players. And this is one of the arguments, and we'll get into the arguments for Andy Pages because I want to make that argument too, because I think both arguments should be made. Well, because I think there is there's an argument that I haven't made yet that might be a little bit compelling with that, and it has to do with some of the minor league options type thing. But if you want to play a little bit more Miguel Rojas at second base and Tommy Edman in center field, I think this could be a viable option if you have James Outman as part of your roster to be able to do that. It doesn't have to, just because you're giving one guy the last position player spot and there seemingly is a spot on the starting lineup, doesn't mean that they're going to be an every single day starter. It could be something where they're expected to get 250, 300 different plate appearances throughout the course of the season and split that up with guys like Kike Hernandez and Miguel Rojas, which if that's the case, you might feel a little bit more comfortable with that. And at least the defense out in the outfield, you might feel a little bit comfortable with if it is a James Outman. And when we're talking about this conversation, I think we're talking about it for domestic opening day, because I think there's a little bit of a distinction that we'll make talking about the Japan series.
Greg is spot on with this deal, Yeah. So, all right, here's I didn't mean, I was just Craig's saying just for Japan there. So here's kind of my point with James Outman. He's 27 years old. This will be his 3rd year. I mean, it was 2 years ago so it'd be his 3rd major league season. He doesn't need to be in Oklahoma City. I mean, just if Oklahoma City's where you're going to put him, I don't have a problem with that. Okay. I mean, whatever decision the Dodgers make, I've been very clear. They know this is the best front office maybe in the history of baseball, okay? And, I mean, the Yankees built that gigantic with Steinbrenner and all that, and they bought players, but the Dodgers have just been so smart about it, and they built the farm system. The Yankees didn't build the farm system. Like, just the whole every element. This might be the best front office in the history of baseball. I'm not exaggerating. So if this front office comes to the conclusion that James Outman is not a major leaguer on this Dodgers club, I have zero problem with that. Zero. Where I would start getting kind of crappy about it is if it's June and he's played every day in Oklahoma City, because nothing is getting accomplished for James Outman in Oklahoma City right now. He's already done that. That boat has already floated. So if you come to the decision that James Outman is not a factor for your major league club, wonderful, great, let's move on. Trade him, DFA him, find a trade partner, or allow him to have his outright release and go somewhere else where he can try to catch on and be a Sacramento A or a Los Angeles Angel like Ryan Noda, and not be sitting in a AAA ballpark where he doesn't belong. That would be my only request, is make a decision on the guy, which that's why he's had so many at-bats. They're trying to make a decision on James Outman. They don't want him to be in Oklahoma City, but they're not convinced that he's going to be in Los Angeles, right? I mean, that's what you're seeing here. So that would be my only request, is Actually make a decision on this guy. Don't ride the fence and send him to Oklahoma City and waste an entire summer of his ability to be a wage earner when he's already 27 years old. I would have less problems with that with Andy Pages because he's a little bit younger.
He is a little bit younger. So it brings up some really compelling questions if you are an organization, which is not about the human element. The human element, I totally agree with that assessment of both James Ellman. And I would also put a lot of that arguments in the same boats within Andy Pages, maybe less so because James Ellman has had a lot more time at the AAA level than an Andy Pages, who had to miss a full season or most of a season during the 2023 season because of an injury, so hasn't had as much time at the Oklahoma City level as we would expect him necessarily to have. So this brings up a couple of different really compelling questions and really fascinating questions of what I think this organization must assess as far as depth that they are going to need for this season, and what is the necessary depth, particularly at the center field position, because I think there is a really good argument to be made for either one of these guys, because both of these guys only have one more minor league option year. There's a lot of different people that have talked about this very specific thing, but I don't think just about anybody has talked about the number of minor league option years like what we have. They only have one minor league option year,
right,
which is incredibly impactful because that means during the 2026 season, they either have to be on the major league roster or they have to designate them for assignment. They have to go to another organization and play a part of them, which not just is impactful for the Dodgers, but is also impactful for other clubs, especially if they have not gotten extended runtime at the major league level, which means that the Dodgers have to make a decision, because as soon as they option either one of these guys, a lot of their value tanks. And not because they did anything wrong, because they lose their last year of minor league option, which means whatever team that picks them up does not have the flexibility with them to be able to send them up and down if needed. That value drops dramatically for either one of these guys. So the question becomes, okay, if that is the evaluation that the Dodgers see, do the Dodgers have enough depth at the outfield, and it's particularly at the center field position, to be able to, if they wanted to take advantage of the value these guys got, assuming that they trade them for equal value for minor league players or whoever they get, if they want to get equal value for these guys, do they have enough depth at the center field position? And so these are the guys currently see as being some of the depth pieces at center field. And you can let me know if you think that there is enough depth at that position to be able to cover the entire season for them. So you have Andy Pages or James Ellman. One of them is going to be at the minor league level. Let's say that the Dodgers decide to trade, or one of them is going to be at the major league level. One of them, let's say the Dodgers decided to trade one of them. So you only have one of those options. Andy Pages is not really a true center fielder, but we know that the Dodgers are playing him in center field because they have no choice based on the free agent signings that they've had. So you have one of them. You also have Tommy Edman as backup, although right now he's playing the second base position, so you'd have to move him off of the second base position to be able to fill that in as a little bit of backup. You also have a Kike Hernandez, who the past 3 seasons has played 114 games in center field, with 4 outs above average during that specific time period. You do have Chris Taylor, although he hasn't played a lot in center field, just 23 games over the past 4 different seasons. And then your depth at the minor league level is a Hae-Sung Kim, which actually I think is incredibly important. Why the Dodgers decided to start playing him in center field, to add additional depth at the center field position if needed, if they needed to call somebody up. And then the other players that you're talking about is like a Justin Dean that we got to see throughout the course of spring training. And then some of the other guys are a little bit more farther away. And I wouldn't necessarily put like a Damon Keith, a little bit more corner outfielder in that, or a Chris Newell. I think he needs to show a little bit more at the minor league level.
Jose Ramos.
You're talking about a little bit more of a question mark. So the question is, in this decision, in this evaluation, is there enough depth in your organization right now could you sustain an injury or two and still be able to have enough people to back up the center field position for your organization to go ahead and potentially trade one of Andy Pages or James Outman?
100% yes, because the other one's going to be your everyday starter. So being an everyday starter, you're going to get 120 starts out of that person, right? So
that's what you assume is you would
so
probably
you need
a whole
42
lot.
games. You need 42 games in center field out of Kike, Chris Taylor, maybe a Ha-Seong Kim, if you call him up, because he is on the 40 man, and then you can get creative and put Tommy Edman out there. So absolutely you do. I mean, there's no question there. Because whichever guy of course, injury changes things, but without injury, you're talking about covering 42 games with 3 or 4 guys. Absolutely, you have depth.
Yeah, and if you're talking about the corner outfields, there's a lot of those guys who can play those positions, and then you have also Teoscar Hernandez and Michael Conforto. I think Eddie Rosario perhaps plays a little bit of a crucial role, being a little bit of guy with depth at the corner outfield. You also have Ryan Ward, who's sitting down at the minor league level waiting for an opportunity. Austin Gauthier has played a little bit of the corner outfield position. So there could be some depth that you have, enough depth to be able to cover some of these positions. So then it becomes a question of, okay, if it is something that we want to be able to trade, the time to be able to trade them is before you option one of these guys down at the minor league level, because as soon as you option them down at the minor league level, a lot of their value goes down quite a bit, especially in the case of Andy Pages, not because of him being the best fit for the Los Angeles Dodgers, but because of him in the eyes of a lot of people as a prospect coming up, having 5 years of control, having one minor league option left. And I think he's a much better fit in one of the corner outfields. And if you have a guy that had as much pedigree as he had coming up through the system, who still was able to showcase at least a league average bat while being cheap and controllable for years to come with a little bit of flexibility to be able to move to the minor league level, I still think that there is a lot of value in that, as long as he has that flexibility to be able to go down to the minor league level. So this is where I present the case for Andy Pages. And it's not just for the Japan series, which I think there's a likelihood that he potentially starts the series in Japan because the Cubs are throwing out 2 left-handed starting pitchers. But Shota Imanaga and Justin Steele are going to be the starters for the Chicago Cubs, 2 left-handed pitchers. You could potentially see them going with the Andy Pages, who had almost a 160 WRC plus versus left-handed pitching. But for the domestic opening day, here's, I think, what's the most compelling case for an Andy Pages. It's an evaluation if the Dodgers wanted to keep some depth at the outfield in case that there is an injury early in the season to either a Michael Conforto or a Teoscar Hernandez or somebody like that. If the decision is an Andy Pages, who did not have a great spring training, which I'll pull up his numbers really quick. He had a 214, 313, 321 slugging percentage. That's a 70 WRC plus and 32 plate appearances. Did walk about 9% and struck out about 22% of the time were his numbers right there. Here's here's the argument for an Andy Pages, and it doesn't mean that he's the best fit for this roster, or doesn't necessarily mean that this could be the best thing for him, but it's a value play, at least early in the season. Could the Dodgers decide or understand that if we option Andy Pages down to the minor league level, his value tanks as a player? Could we punt that decision for right now for at least a month or so in case there is an injury to a Chris Taylor, to a Teoscar Hernandez, to a Michael Conforto, to somebody where there's going to be a corner outfield open, in which case we might need both James Outman and Andy Pages, because as soon as we make that decision to be able to option him down, his value tanks. And if the Dodgers don't necessarily need all of that depth, then could it be a decision where the Dodgers decide, hey, instead of optioning Andy Pages down, we think James Outman is the best fit for this team. At that point, before removing his minor league option, they decide to go ahead and utilize him. So if they decide with an Andy Pages, perhaps could it be for him and for the organization a punt to see if there is an injury, especially because nobody particularly stood out. And the Dodgers might want to keep Andy Pages. If you look at the number of left-handed hitters that are going to be part of this team in the 2026 team, they might want a right-handed hitting outfielder. Andy Pages fills in that role, but there would be a lot less of a there'd be a lot less talk if he did not have flexibility next year, or it boxes them in a little bit with some of the decisions that they could make. So I think James Outman is clearly the best fit for this club, but value-wise, could the Dodgers decide to wait and see what happens with the rest of this roster for now before necessarily deciding who to go with long-term for the 2025 club?
So that same argument can be made for James Outman. If you option him, he loses his option too. The same argument can be made for both players. Yes.
So then it becomes in a question of, okay, not who the Dodgers feel necessarily, but who do other organizations feel
who would you
is
want
the
more?
most valuable right now?
Who would you want more? Who has the better major league track record and the better minor league track record?
If you're talking about track record at the major league level, I'm going to guess you're going to make that argument for James Outman because
look at the track record at the minor league level. James Outman has outperformed Andy Pages at every step, every level.
I think you might be underputting some of what Andy Pages has been able to do at the minor league level too. Yeah, we can pull up the numbers.
At each level, what James Outman did at AA, what James Outman has done at AAA, and compare that to Andy Pages.
Yeah, and I know
maybe you're right. But
I know Andy Pages had a little bit of a rough, about league average 2022 season. His 2021 season, he was about a 150 WRC plus type of player. 2023 is a little bit of a question just because he had like a month and a half type or so. James Outman has put up some really good numbers, and even last year put up a 130 WRC plus.
Better than Andy Pages at every level if you compare the two.
But if you're talking about other organizations, Andy Pages has more years of control attached to him. Other organizations would not box in Andy Pages into the center field position, which means he could go to different corners. Andy Pages has 5 years control. James Outman has 3 or 4, something like that. I think 4 years of control is what he would have. They would have the exact same number of options that they could be able to utilize with him. And I think Andy Pages, and this is something that I'm just thinking with the mindset of other organizations. Perhaps this is not an evaluation of what is fair. Andy Pages did come and has come up with a really high prospect pedigree, perhaps something that James Outman did not come up with.
Which means nothing. I tell people that all the time. That prospect deal means nothing. Okay, James Outman is. So again, I mean, if you look at every single level, high A, double A, triple A, major league level, this year in spring training, so that the narrative is, well, Outman's a defensive player, Andy Pages is the better offensive player. Actually, that hasn't been the case at any level at any part of each one of their careers. Outman has been the better offensive player at every single level they've been at. Now, you can have your prospect rankings and you can say this or that or this or that. I'm going to say I don't care. I've seen both of them play, and none of that matters whatsoever to me. And Andy Pages actually hasn't been a better offensive player than James Outman. Now, one thing Andy Pages has done better than James Outman is not strike out as much. So if you want to make the argument that you think Andy Pages has the same type of power potential as James Outman with a lower strikeout potential, and that's why you want to go with Andy Pages instead of James Outman, I have no problem with that. But if you want to tell me that he's the better hitting prospect or he's been the better hitting prospect, I can't buy it. It's never been the case.
I think this perhaps is unfair to James Outman, but I think this is also something that other teams are going to look at. I think they're going to look a little bit at the 2024 season at the major league level, which is not completely fair to James Outman. That's talking about 100 some different plate appearances where he really did struggle at the big league level, where Andy Pages was able to produce, maybe not to the same degree that James Outman did during his rookie season. But I think that could be something that could be a little bit of worrisome for James Outman. So I think this question, I think you're totally right. Yeah. This argument could go both ways, but it's an evaluation of who do the Dodgers think other organizations feel has the higher value attached to them. If they think that other organizations think James Outman has more value attached to him when he has that minor league option, then you do the exact same argument that I'm making for Andy Pages right now. Yeah. Whereas if you think that is attached to an Andy Pages, then you go ahead and keep Andy Pages on the roster, and then it's a punt. That is the argument as far as what you are making right there. So I think there is definitely points to be able to make with both of them. Yeah. And I think this is a really intriguing decision that they're going to have to make. But the point that I'm trying to make with this is if we assume...
You're saying Pages is more valuable to other clubs than Outman. And so by sending him to AAA, he's going to lose more value, which is more impactful because he has more value. If Outman loses value, it's not as big of a deal because he didn't have as much value to begin with. That's what you're saying.
That is the argument that I'm making. And
I'm saying based on what? Based on what?
That is based on the number of years that he has of club control that he has. That's based on the production.
Because it's not based on-field production at all, at any level. That's what I'm saying.
You look at what Andy Pages has done at the minor league level. It has been incredibly productive. What he's been able to produce.
It absolutely
and you add that with an extra year of control that he has. You combine that with some of the periphery numbers with a little bit less volatility that he has. You combine that with the fact that he does not have to play center field, although he has the ability
to.
Neither
does Outman. Outman would be a better right fielder than Pages too. I mean, Outman's just a better outfielder.
Defensively, there is no doubt.
Outman's played a lot of right field.
There's no doubt about James Outman being the better outfielder than Andy Pages. So the question is, do you believe in the potential long-term for Andy Pages offensively versus the long-term output for James Outman offensively, which we've already had this conversation. There's serious concern about his swing and miss. The swing and miss 100%. Is going to be something that is going to limit James Outman offensively during the long put, which means that he has to hit for power in order to be productive. With Andy Pages, he comes with a player that has the ability to hit for even more power than what he does. He is able to make more consistent contact at the plate than a James Outman is. Even through the course of the spring training was able to do that, and through the course of his entire major league career, which means that he could hit a little bit more singles and still be somebody that's incredibly productive. And you look at some of his platoons against left-handed pitching was incredibly powerful and wasn't completely awful against right-handed pitching.
Now, see, that's the argument I can. Hey, look at the platoon here. Those are the arguments I can live with right there because those are absolutely factual. I have nothing to fight back against with that.
Yeah, so I think there is a lot of value with that. If you're talking about James Outman, I think the biggest red flags for him right now are the strikeout percentage.
Yeah, no doubt.
And during his time at the major league level, 100-some plate appearances, 50 WRC plus last year. I think that's a really big red flag for a lot of other organizations, that Andy Pages, who does have a little bit of uncertainty because he hasn't had as much time at the major league level, he doesn't have those red flags. And I think for a lot of clubs, sometimes the uncertainty, perhaps this is something that's not necessarily the smartest thing, but sometimes not having the answer of what they possibly could be something that is more attractive, because then they can use that as a little bit of an explanation for some of their decisions.
At the minor league level, I would agree if you're trying to get a prospect to fill out for your AAA roster. I don't think that's the case if you're going to get in a major league level. They don't want uncertainty when they're going to fill out their major league roster. They're looking for certainty.
There's a lot of uncertainty for a lot of major league clubs about some of the swing and miss stuff, with some of the struggles that James Outman has had. So that has to be a question that they have to answer if they decide to go ahead and trade for him. So that becomes a question of, and this is a question great for the audience, who do you think other organizations feel is the most valuable player in the Dodgers organization? And then what do you do with that player? Do you want that player to get every single day at reps at the minor league level, so then they might be ready, but then when you call them up, you give them 100 different at-bats since they're not good, designate them as for assignment sometime in 2026? Or is it we're going to live with whatever player, no matter who it is, there's going to be some frustrating things about this individual player, whether it's James Outman in the swing and miss, whether it's Andy Pages in the defense and some of the base running thing. no matter which one that it is, there's going to be some sort of frustrating. So then is it to at least start the season, we're going to delay this decision until we absolutely have to option one of these guys down at the minor league level? That's honestly the direction that I would probably go right now. If not, and this could be something where if it is James Outman and you're like, no, we're going to live with James Outman right from the start, I would very seriously consider and be calling different organizations right now about a trade for Andy Pies. Yeah. Because I think his value still to this point right now, and this perhaps because this could be a misread on my part on a value perspective, I still think that his value is pretty high to a lot of other organizations. And I think there's other organizations that could really use another right-handed bat to add to their lineup that they might be willing to give up and make some sort of trade. If he gets optioned down to the minor league level, you're not going to Michael Busch, Andy Pages. You're not going to get those level of prospects.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's just a question of, is the evaluation based off of a ceiling or a floor? So obviously you'd rather have like a Dalton Rushing who has an incredibly high ceiling, and because of his bat to ball skills and his plate discipline should also have a very high floor as well. Right. So those are the types of prospects that you don't trade, even if you don't have a place to put them. Those are the reasons why you don't trade guys like that. So James Outman certainly has lower floor, and we saw that last year. But to this point in his career, at every level, he's had the higher ceiling. So really, it's just a matter of which one do you want? I mean, do you want the lower floor? Do you want the guy that that at the very worst he's going to be a little bit worse than Major League average, or do you want the guy that, hey, at the very best, could be a 4-WAR type player?
Yeah, and especially this is a really interesting question because it's also one of those things, too, where if it's something where you're wanting to target different free agents in the upcoming future, and let's say that you don't want to limit yourself and want to potentially target another corner outfielder, well, then it would be beneficial to have somebody that has the ability to play center field. And I don't necessarily know if the Dodgers long-term want to see Andy Pages continue in center field. I think they would much prefer him to be a corner outfielder, but the guys that they're able to target are some of those corner outfield type players.
The hitters are easier to find in corners than they are in center field.
It is much easier to find a corner outfielder than it is to find a center fielder, which is another check mark. Hey, maybe this is something with James Outman that we can go ahead and do. If it is James Outman, and I've made a lot of arguments for Andy Pages.
Yeah, absolutely.
But and I've also made the argument before this segment for James Outman as well. Both of these players I have tremendous respect for, and I think the absolute world of both of these guys. Yeah. If it is something where it is James Outman, I am totally 100% okay and understand that decision for the Los Angeles Dodgers because I think he's probably the best fit for this club, and he's going to, what you're going to get at least defensively wise for him. But if that is the case, if I am the organization, if I am the Dodgers, before the Dodgers have the ring ceremony against the Detroit Tigers, before Andy Pages gets optioned down, you have to trade Andy Pages.
Yeah. So my question is, how much time do you have to spend down in the minor leagues before you actually lose that option year?
It's a really good question.
I don't think it's just like the first time you send them down.
Yeah,
I think there's 3 or 4.
I think it's like 10 to 20 days, something like that.
So, I mean, you still do have a buffer period. It's not just like the day you send them down.
Yes, yeah.
There is a little bit. I don't know that exact rule, but.
Yeah, I don't remember exactly that rule either. There is a little bit of a buffer period that you have the ability to be able to maneuver back and forth. And it could also be something where, especially early in the season, there's just not a whole lot of trade interest, or it's something where it's no, we know that we're going to need him as part of the 2026 roster. Well, Andy Pages that being. And so we're just going to option him down. We're going to live with that. And then we're just going to have him be part of the major league roster from 2026 until he's a free agent or until he showcases that he's not hitting enough. That could be the decision, but that's a little bit of a risky proposition to be able to take because then he is a major league player and he's stuck on the roster just like players like Chris Taylor is stuck on the roster right now. And so you have to make that decision. And so I would if not already, I would very seriously consider looking for some type of trade, because I think, as we've already discussed with this, I think there's probably enough sufficient depth. And if they are concerned about that, you punt for the first month or so of the season with whoever player you think has more value, and then make a determination from there.
Tomatley is in the house, man. Tomatley is awesome. I love it. Tomatley, thank you for joining, Tomatley. It's great to have you on a live show. One of the absolute best baseball people. Man, if you ever read Tomatley's comments, it's just insane. I learn something every single time I read one of Tomatley's comments. Thank you for joining, Tomatley. Steve Stell, Dodgers need the extra defense Albin provides. Daryl Jackson makes a good point here. Daryl is always looking out for our boys down there in Oklahoma City. I really appreciate that. Well, I really appreciate everything about Daryl, but especially the fact he's always looking out for the boys in Oklahoma City. Hunter Fiducia doesn't need to be in freaking Oklahoma City this year. I mean, I get it. It's what's best for the organization because of the depth and all that. But you already have Dalton Rushing. So why? I mean, what? You don't need Dalton Rushing and Hunter Fiducia. You just don't. I mean, and Austin Barnes and Will Smith. I don't think you do.
Yeah, it is frustrating for Hunter Fiducia. He, as I'm sure we'll probably get to a little bit of this, talking about some of the potential roster for the race for Japan. He is flying over with the team for Japan, just like he did with Korea, although he was not part of the 26-man roster for the series in Korea, and that's probably going to be the same role for him in the Japan series. With Hunter Fiducia, he's stuck at the minor league level, and that sucks for him. He doesn't deserve that. He deserves to have some sort of opportunity at the major league level, and right now he is just seen as insurance for a Austin Barnes or for a Will Smith in case there's anything that goes wrong with them. I'd rather them have another guy like a Chris Oki that could be some of that additional insurance in case there is something that happens to either one of them. I'm not anticipating any sort of long-term injury for both of them. And if there is some sort of long-term injury, you could put Dalton Rushing to help fill in that shoes for them. So I just think it's depth that they could potentially fill in with somebody else that they could find that could be somebody that could just sit and be a quad A guy, similar to what a David Bodie is, as opposed to Hunter Fiducia. And you have one in Chris Oki already right now that you could be able to utilize with him, as opposed to wasting the career of Hunter Fiducia. That's not something that I'm for really at all. I understand it as an organization and wanting depth. But as for a player, it absolutely sucks. Yeah. And he's one of the players that, as soon as they re-signed or picked up the option for an Austin Barnes, it becomes a lot more difficult to be able to see any sort of opportunity for him, which he does not deserve.
Yeah. Again, that's not a criticism at all of the front office. They are doing exactly like they should. They have their stars, they have their depth, and then they have their plan B depth and their plan C depth. And why in the hell would they get rid of any of that when they don't have to?
Yeah.
Right? So this is not in any way, shape, or form. The Dodgers are doing exactly what they should. I'm just kind of coming at this from a humanitarian perspective, that from a prospects perspective, just the system, the way the system's set up sucks. That you can just be buried in Oklahoma City even though you hit 300 every spring training that you're up there, so that kind of
it's not just spring training stats. It's the entire season at the Oklahoma City where he's able to be productive. Stats that say, hey, I'm ready for some type of opportunity, some type of run at the major league level. And when you have two players that are signed to major league contracts, for Will Smith, long-term for Austin Barnes, he has no ability to be able to be optioned down at the minor league level. So he's right now, Hunter Fiducia is stuck right there. And that sucks for him. Yeah. So Steve Stale says, I think Paez starts the year in AAA playing while Outman starts in center field. That's the situation. If he's there for a certain amount of time, he loses his last option year. At that point, he is out of minor league options. His value tanks. And now basically you either play Andy Paez at the major league level in 2026 or you trade him for a bag of peanuts. Those are really your only two options at that point. And that's certainly not maximizing his value. Chuck Huddleston, not my preference, but I think Paez sticks. Roberts isn't afraid to sacrifice defense. He won it all last year doing just that. Outman's left-handed bat might play, but not off the bench coming in cold. I would agree with the off the bench coming in cold
for Albin. Albin is a guy that if you can't get him every day at bats, it's going to be very difficult for him to. His timing already is an issue. The swing and miss is already an issue. That just exacerbates. Is that a real word? Exacerbates. If you're not getting consistent at bat. So Alex the God too. Second base, center field is going to be interesting as Edmund and Pai has hit lefties much better. So the question is who plays second base, center field against righties. And then Gregory has a question. CNAV just joined us. CNAV, our wonderful moderator. Thank you so much for joining. We have a question here. Actually, let me scroll back down. What do you guys think it would take to trade for Elly De La Cruz?
Ooh, that's it's going to take. I don't think the Dodgers have the ability to be able to trade for Elly De La Cruz right now. Elly De La Cruz is a superstar in the making. He is that.
So give me a list of prospects it would take.
Oh, it would take. I mean, you're talking
just
about.
It's all fantasy, but give me what the prospects you think it would take.
I don't think if you package Dalton Rushing, Zaire Hope, Josue De Paula, Jackson Ferris, and one other guy, that it would be enough.
Yeah.
And that's all of your top guys, not including Roki Sasaki, which the Dodgers are not going to realistically trade. You're talking about you're talking about draining your entire farm system for Elly, and the reason why he is that valuable, he is not only plays a premium position, but he's got years of control and years of cheap control at that. If you're talking about towards closer to where Elly De La Cruz is going to be a free agent, if you're talking about 1 to 2 years of control left with him in Cincinnati, and Cincinnati has not extended him to a long-term deal, then it becomes a lot more realistic. So you can bring that up in a couple of years when he's close to being a free agent. But right now, you're talking about every single player that is part of this farm system, and it's probably some major league talent as well. Perhaps you could throw in Andy Pages or somebody in that mix to be able to sweeten the deal a little bit. But you're talking absolutely massive and unrealistic at that point.
Yeah. Tommy Edmonds had a good spring. It's been kind of weird. It doesn't feel like the Dodgers have kind of it's just kind of like they've pieced it together. It doesn't usually, like in spring training, you piece things together, then like your last 3 or 4 games, everybody plays together, whether it's even only for like 4 or 5 innings. It doesn't feel like the Dodgers did that this year. It kind of feels like they pieced things together here and there, and there just wasn't ever they never just put their real lineup out there for 2 or 3 games in a row.
Yeah, not all the time. It was like, especially early in the spring training, it was a every other day type of deal for a lot of these different guys going out there and getting at bats every other day. And it wasn't one of those things where it was we're going to throw out there and put their opening day lineup. There was a couple of times towards the end of spring training where there was a lot of regulars that were part of that mix, but not necessarily something that it happened every single day. But I mean, they're going to go out there once the season actually starts, once these games actually count, which is a week from now, or less than a week from now, however many days it actually is, to where they're actually going to go out there and they're going to put a real lineup out there. And I'm excited about them being able to do that. And I'm excited for these games to start pretty soon.
Okay, so let's take a trip down the farm, okay? You ready?
Sounds good.
Who on the farm, which prospect do you think has made the most amount of noise this spring training?
Most amount of noise this spring training? Okay, do we want let's talk about pitching wise right now. Pitching wise, there's a couple of names that come up, and guys that have pitched quite a bit in spring training. 3 guys that I'm thinking of, one of which is on the 40-man roster.
Give me the name so I can put it up.
Yeah. 3 names that I'm talking about. First name, Jack Dreyer, is the one of the guys that has come up some of the most in spring training. Let me just go through some of his numbers really quick in spring training, and then we'll leapboard this a little bit into some of the talk about discussion of him on the roster. So with Jack Dreyer, did give up, I believe, a couple of home runs, which inflated some of his whip, but still a 3 ERA with a 2.99 expected FIP. Strikeout percentage of 45.5 in spring training. Ooh. With less than a 5% walk percentage. And some of the most impressive things about Jack Dreyer is it was a 26% swinging strike percentage, which means 26% of his pitches ended in swings and misses. And you got to see that with a lot of different guys that covered the Los Angeles Dodgers who really had not heard a whole lot of Jack Dreyer besides the Dodgers added him to the 40-man roster.
They need to watch more Dodgers dogs in, dang it, because we've been talking about them for a long time.
Not just them, and I'm not intended to call out a lot of them, but Dodgers fans as well. They got to see just how truly talented Jack Dreyer is. Particularly, there was one night game that the Dodgers were playing at some point when he came in and he closed out everybody extremely fast with like 4 or 5 swings and misses. Jack Dreyer just went out there and absolutely shoved. And you look at the result of a lot of the injuries that have taken place with guys like an Evan Phillips, Michael Kopech, talking about an Edgardo Henriquez and a Michael Grove, unfortunately, for all of those guys. Jack Dreyer has a realistic path. In fact, we'll go through this math after we do the trip down at the farm. He has a very realistic path of making it onto the Japan, not just onto the Japan Series roster, but there's a very real possibility he could be on the domestic opening day roster. That's just how good he has been, not just in spring training, but throughout his career at the minor league level. He's incredibly talented.
Yeah. Man, we've been telling you this for a long time. We told you he was going to get protected from the Rule 5 because until you see the guy, you don't get it. You know, it's just so good. So the second guy, I think I have a pretty good idea as far as that made the most amount of noise and increased their stock. Now, when I say stock, I don't necessarily mean like draft stock or trade stock. I just mean stock within the Dodgers system. I would have to think that's Ben Casparius.
Yeah, he has also been one of those guys where, as a result of a lot of the injuries that have taken place, he's just gone out there and absolutely shoved. Ben Casparius, and this story of this kid is absolutely remarkable, and he's one of those guys that's going to go out there with how wicked his stuff is. He can exceed in a lot of those short inning spurts out there, and so he's gone from a guy that has really struggled at the minor league level to a guy that can really go out there. And you mentioned it right there. Some of the velos and stuff, and some of the stuff, just measuring some of that during the course of spring training, been so encouraging to watch for Ben Casparius.
It has. Okay, so Jack Dreyer, Ben Casparius, I think those are 1 and 2 that have increased their stock the most. Who was the third guy that you wanted to mention?
Okay, so let's actually mention a couple of different guys. The guys that you probably aren't going to see quite yet at the minor league level, but guys that have showcased some really good skill sets during the course of spring training. One guy that I've been talking about quite a bit, dating back to the Real 5 Drafts show, guy who has been on the show, Jose Rodriguez. Is showcased quite a bit. 2.08 ERA during 4 1/3 innings. Strikeout percentage of 39%. Walk percentage less than 6% during the limited sample size. A 159 expected FIP and a 118 FIP through the course of spring training. I think this was really one of the first real showcases of him going out there and being able to perform in front of a lot of Dodgers fans. I think a lot of Dodgers fans hadn't really heard of him, but I think with his length, with his with a lot of his pitch mix, I think it's really, really excellent. And I think he just took another one of those additional steps. And like we saw with some guys that were part of the 2024 club or 2023 Great Lakes Loons Club, Justin Robleski is a perfect example. He went from ending the season in high A in 2023 to by midsummer being on the Los Angeles Dodgers. And with some of these injuries starting to rack up, perhaps you look to see if some of these guys who might be a little bit further away than what you expect, perhaps they're one of these guys that can be able to make this step up.
So Jose Rodriguez, no doubt about it. I think he has greatly increased his stock. And a guy that I think went from being somebody kind of like the pitching version of a Alex Freeland, a guy that had really good stuff, but it was stuff over execution. I think last year is how I think he left 2024 is Justin Robleski. So I think where he has taken the leap this year is that he's added that. See that front to back. He's doing that more often, and he's commanding his off-speed stuff. Which, if you watched our interview over the offseason, that was his biggest goal was to command the offseason. or the command the off speed. He's done that. So I think the execution that Justin Wrobleski's been able to prove in this spring training has really increased his stock in the minds, I would have to think, in the minds of the Dodgers front office. It has in my mind.
Yeah, he's pitched some of the most 9 1/3 innings through the course of spring training. And as you mentioned, his execution, his walk percentage through the course of spring training was under 3%, 2.9%. And the strikeout percentage was 26.5 for him. Again, very limited sample size, but I think you can see some of the confidence him going out there and being able to execute. That is the Robo that I remember when he was the best pitcher for a East Division Championship Loon team in 2023. He can go out there and exceed. He can go out there and excel. And this is another one of those guys. As a result of some of the injuries, he's aboard the plane right now for the team that's heading out there for Japan and is in competition to be one of the bulk inning guys out of the bullpen, especially with the injury that has happened to a Tony Gonsolin. So then you don't have either Tony Gonsolin or Dustin May being some of those bulk inning guys. Early in the season, I think it could be a competition between him and Landon Knack, whoever you want to be coming out of this bullpen, being some guys that gets a little bit of extra innings. And if we're talking about just results from spring training, Justin Wrobleski's been one of those guys that has earned it, and he's looking incredibly good right now.
I would totally agree. Another guy that I told you that he is going to make his major league debut in 2025 somehow, some way, because he has as much momentum as any other pitcher in the organization. I am so happy other people have gotten to see this in spring training. The execution, the professionalism in the way that Jared Karros pitches, it's awesome to watch. And Dodgers fans have been super pumped about it. Obviously, the last name, but kind of like with the Jose Rodriguez deal for you, the Jared Karros thing for me, because I've been tooting his horn for I don't know how long.
Yes.
And for other fans to get to see it now, that slider, the curveball, the spike curveball, the fastball, the changeup, all of it, man, it's been super gratifying. Jared Karros has really increased his stock, in my opinion.
Oh yeah.
Increased. He's gone out there and showcased it to other people that maybe didn't know.
He's just showcased what he has been like at the minor league level consistently throughout his basically entire tenure at the minor league level, from his time in Rancho to his very brief time in between 2 seasons in Great Lakes to when he had the ability to go up to Tulsa. Yeah, his stuff, like you mentioned, that curveball, that spike curveball and stuff. Oh, it's ridiculous being able to see him go out there. So he's got the legacy behind him. He also is one of these guys that has the ability to be able to provide a little bit of length innings for him. So you talk about some of the depth that they have at the starting pitching that has the ability to potentially call up. Jared Karros is one of those guys that is rapidly emerging as a potential viable option. And if you look at some of the young guys that have debuted, a lot of these guys didn't really spend a significant extended period of time at the AAA level before they made their debuts, in part because that was just happened to be because of injury. Could we see the exact same thing happen to Jared Karros? Kind of hope not, because that means that there's some type of injury within the major league staff. But also, I kind of do hope it happens, because Jared Karros, I think, is just that good.
Yeah. So another guy that we have seen in person many different times, but here's the proof. I mean, here's video. We've told you that he reshaped a slider this time last year, and his sequencing and his execution within his sequencing just took an absolute massive leap last year. He gained a ton of momentum in 2024. He's carried that momentum into the offseason, and it's gotten to the point to where Freddie Freeman's taking at bats off him going, dang, man, that stuff's kind of crazy looking, right? And so Chris Campos has really made a name for himself, not with guys like me that have been seeing him for a long time, but for maybe other people that, Chris Campos, what? Oh, wow, Chris Campos is pretty good. I think he's really made a name for himself.
He's made a name for himself. He hasn't pitched a ton in spring training, just 3 innings, but he's made the absolute most of all of the innings that he's had when he's down there. You talk about the execution. He can go out there and execute just about as well as anybody in this system. During the course of spring training, during his 3 innings pitched, didn't walk anybody, struck out about 45.5% of hitters that he had just went out there and just performed when he was given that opportunity. I think he's going to be somebody that the organization is going to continue to give increased looks at as maybe we didn't necessarily expect this guy to be the guy, but if he's the one that's going out there and performing, you bet he's going to get the opportunity to be able to go out there and get increased opportunities. I'm excited to see, because I think there is a very serious step forward that he took last year. And I think you could see him continue with that during the 2025 season. Chris Campos is really exciting prospect to watch. And I think it was another one of these guys where Dodgers fans maybe hadn't heard a whole lot about him. But then once they got the opportunity to be able to see him a little bit, you can see why we are excited about him.
Yeah. Tomatley saying Campos reminds him a little of Pedro Martinez in his setup and delivery, maybe demeanor a little bit too with the focus. Who I see all over again is Gavin Stone. He just kind of, it's the Gavin Stone thing. He's always been told he's too small. It's the execution. It's the location. It's the precision. And it's just the motivation and focus. But of course, I got to see Gavin Stone quite a bit. But okay, so those are Jared Quiros, Chris Campos, Jose Rodriguez, and Jack Dreyer. Are there any other prospects that you think have really stuck out to you in spring training as far as making a name for themselves?
It's a good. I think those are a lot of those. Jackson Ferris had some good swing and miss stuff with some of the stuff that he had. That's just throwing a different pitcher that is out there. Offensively, Dalton Rushing walked 43% of the time that he was hitting, so he got on base an absolute ton. Defensively, we got to see some of the highlights from a player like a Zaire Hope in the outfield. Offensively cooled off as the course of spring training went along, but started off a little bit hot. We got to see a lot of guys go in there and be able to perform to little varying degrees. But I think you got to see a good mix of a lot of different guys. And I'm excited to see the course of what they're able to produce through the upcoming season as we continue to go along and find out more and more about these guys and just how good and talented these prospects are, because I fully believe that each one of these guys are talented. And I'm excited to see what they're able to do. Just like I'm excited to see how this roster is going to be able to shape up as the Dodgers are able to land in Japan, because here's something that I think is really exciting that perhaps is something that didn't fully expect going into this. So this might be a little bit of a surprise for you, Casey. But the Dodgers had released a video like an hour before we went online with the show. I don't believe they released the 31. So when they travel over to Japan, they can have 31 players that are traveling over to Japan. They're eligible for the exhibition games against Japan. And then there's a 26-man roster that they have for the actual 2-game series, which there's not the exact same rules as it is through the course of the regular season, meaning that Dustin May doesn't have to be optioned down to the minor league level. He's not making the trip over because they won't need the 5th starter during the course of those 4 games. So they're relying a little bit more on the bullpen arms. But here's the fun thing about this, and we'll talk a little bit about the math really quick. One of the guys that was showcased in that video, and one of the guys that has the opportunity to potentially make his big league debut going over there, is Nick Frasso. Yeah. Nick Frasso is going over there. And you talk about the math of the number of pitchers that are going over to Japan, just talking about the number of players that were in that video and the number of players that are on this roster. You have Blake Snell and Tyler Glasnow that are likely going to be guys that aren't going to be on the big league roster for the Japan series, the 2-game Japan series, because I think the expectation is those are going to be the 2 guys that start the exhibition games, which means that the Dodgers are likely bringing over, I believe, 16 different pitchers, which means that 3 of the pitchers are going to be left off the roster, 2 of those being the starting pitchers, which means I think you are likely, and this is just a guess of what some of the players that are going over there, because we didn't see anybody. We did not see Jack Dreyer in that video, although I think Jack Dreyer is likely going to make it over to Japan. You're talking about choose 3 of these 4 players. You're talking about a Jack Dreyer, a Nick Frasso, a Matt Sauer, and probably, and this is not unconfirmed, probably a guy like a Luis Garcia or some other non-roster invite. choose 2 or choose 3 of those 4 players to be on the roster in Japan, which very likely means we could be seeing in a week, over the course of the next week, the debuts of either or both of a Jack Dreyer or a Nick Frasso coming up at the big league level in Japan, which would be incredibly exciting to be able to see that for them.
It would, absolutely. So we've been going at this just about an hour and a half. I would say the number one winner in spring training, as far as, I don't know if Kasperius is still a prospect. I think he's still considered a prospect, but I would say he's probably number one as far as jumping up in line. I mean, I think when he started, he was in the depth pool, and I think he jumped to the very top of that depth pool in terms of all those young arms that are starter / reliever / whatever type guys. So, hey, Austin, this has been a great show. We've been at it for about an hour and a half. We have had just a great crowd. We have a question here from Tomatley. Is Christian Romero hurt? Was expecting to see him pitch one of the games. Not that I know of. I did see Christian Romero earlier in spring training, but because I remember we talked about him. But I don't think Christian Romero is hurt. I had no expectations of seeing him on the main field. But do you know anything about Romero?
I do not. I'm trying to remember right now if I remember seeing him in spring training, which is a little bit difficult because not everybody has names on the back of their jerseys, so I have to recognize the face, and I don't really remember exactly.
I remember talking about him. I know he pitched this once.
I have not heard, although I'm not privy to any of the information as far as who's healthy, who is injured, or who's not. And I don't remember exactly. If he went out there and performed in spring training as well. That's some of the things that potentially could look at. Okay, why would this player not necessarily be playing on the big field? Could be lead to a little bit of questions and speculation, but I'm not going to really deal with a whole lot of that because I don't really know what exactly is going on. It could be that they're working stuff in the backfield as well.
Yeah. Okay, man. Do you have any final thoughts here before we get out of here?
Yeah, so the Dodgers we're less than a week away from games actually starting. You're going to wake up and watch the games that are happening at 5 o'clock Central Time in the mornings for at least the start of it before work for the Japan series. Casey, are you excited for some of that?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, 100%.
Oh, yeah. No, it's a little bit easier for me.
Can't wait to get Grumpy Coach Hold on the air.
Yeah. I mean, it's one of those things where, I'm not I'm not easy to wake up, but I should not be the one complaining if it's 6 o'clock in the morning that I get to wake up and watch these games as opposed to 3 o'clock in the morning, which is most people that are watching, I'm assuming, are going to have to wake up to be able to watch that series. We're less than a week away from everybody's sleep schedule being messed up, but from baseball games actually counting. And what's really exciting about this is not just the homecoming for Shohei Ohtani, for Yoshi Yamamoto, for Roki Sasaki, but it is the excitement of this 2025 Dodgers club, which is incredibly talented, which on paper is the team that is expected to go out there and win the World Series. There are some hiccups already with some of the injuries that have taken place, a lot more than I think what we might have anticipated, which always seems to be the case, but that it allows for potentially additional opportunities for some of these guys to be able to run through it that might not have gotten an opportunity. So for players like a Jack Dreyer, for a Justin Robleski, for Landon Knack, for a Ben Kasperius, for potentially a Nick Frasso during this series in Japan, this could be an opportunity for them to be able to showcase at least a little bit of some of their skills. And then as this battle continues, be able to run and make a name for themselves. And that is some of the parts that I'm most excited for at watching the game, besides it just being a baseball game that actually counts. Opening day, less than a week away. I can't wait for it.
All right. Thanks, man.
Thanks, Case.
For Austin Brubaker, I'm Casey Porter until Friday night in the Big Town when we join you again for Dodgers Dogs as part of the Dodgers Daily Network. It's a great day to be a Dodger. Always a great day to be a Dodger. Is that not right, Austin?
That's correct.